So now we're going to talk about how flow makes you feel and why it makes you feel that way. Also, why it makes you more creative, uh, and how, like why it makes your learning, why it improves your learning. Yeah. Okay, so first of all, in Stephen's Google talk, he talks about how they how he and Jamie, when they were looking at flow states and altered states, what they were interested in was how do these altered states shift your feelings. They knew that there was context for many of these altered states, and they wanted to scrape away that context, whether it was religious or spiritual context, and they wanted to get at how these altered states make you feel. And they came up with uh, four phenomenon of how it makes you feel, and they named them selflessness, timelessness, effortlessness, and richness. And they call them all together, they call them stir. And I'm going to extrapolate what they say those experiential phenomena mean and why and the reasons they give for why you feel that way during an altered state experience. Okay, so first off, let's talk about selflessness. So this is the feeling that that inner critic that you have goes quiet. That voice that's telling you that you are too good for whatever you're doing, or you already know everything about what you're doing, or you're not good enough. That voice goes dim during these altered states experiences, and it's almost the feeling that, as I might have already said, your inner critic goes away. So you might ask why. Why does that happen? Why do you feel that way during these experiences? And what they say is that it's due to this phenomena called transient hypofrontality. And transient meaning temporary, hypo meaning less than usual, and frontality referring to the front part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex. So there is a lot of theory to suggest that the prefrontal cortex is where your ego resides. It's a network in your brain where they think that that's where our sense of self resides. That's where we process the experiences we go through and uh, and form our beliefs and our morals, and that's where we slowly integrate and cultivate an identity for ourselves. So that's also the place that we, because of this identity that we've created for ourselves, uh, that's the place where we will form doubts, or uh, where we will have these ideas of entitlement. And so what they say is that this process called transient hypofrontality occurs when you are concentrating on a task very intensely. What happens is that your brain needs energy to continue concentration. So very similar to the idea that we talked about in the previous section. Your brain needs to take energy from other parts of the brain in order to continue concentrating. And one area that becomes dimmed during a flow state is the prefrontal cortex, cortex. And and so um, so you literally lose the ability, they say, to form the sense of self in that moment, to uh, as the activity in your prefrontal cortex dims. I hope I've explained that. Okay. So then we have the phenomena of timelessness. So timelessness occurs because of the same reason that selflessness occurs. But first, let's talk about what timelessness is. Timelessness is this idea that, this feeling that time is strange during a flow state. Everything is slowed down. It seems like everything is happening in freeze frame, and yet time goes by so quickly. 5 hours goes by, and it seems like it's only been 5 minutes. This is the sense of timelessness. They say that this feeling of timelessness occurs because of the same reason that the feeling of selflessness occurs, because of transient hypofrontality, because the prefrontal cortex has dimmed activity during periods of peak concentration, because energy is needed by the brain, and so it takes it away from the prefrontal cortex. And the reason for this occurring is that the prefrontal cortex is where we go to is where we store memories. It's where we think about, and it's where we think about the future. It's also where we make general time calculations. So when the prefrontal cortex dims and activity lessens in that area, we lose the ability to recall memories, and we lose the ability to think and worry about the future. And so we literally can't tell past from present from future, and we become locked in in what they call the deep present. And this touches on that idea that I said in the first section, where we talked about what flow is, and I said that Stephen and Jamie call it a focusing skill, where your attention becomes locked in the present, and that's what happens when you lose the ability to recall memories and think about the future. Okay, so the next phenomena is effortlessness. So this is the feeling that you get in a flow state or an altered state where it's not necessary to motivate yourself. The activity that you're doing is intrinsically motivational, and you don't need anyone to tell you to continue doing it because you're enjoying it so much. I like to think about this as for some tasks that I do, I have to tell myself, come on, Louis, one more rep, 5 more minutes of writing, one more squat. I have to light the fires for the engines of my for my motivational engines. But when you are in a flow state or in an altered state, there's almost this feeling that like motivating yourself is unnecessary because you're so locked in the activity. It's so enjoyable what you're doing. And they say in the book Stealing Fire from the Gods, Jamie and Stephen say that it's for this reason that extreme sports athletes will risk life and limb for what they do. It's because it's so intrinsically enjoyable. And it's for this reason that religious ascetics will forsake um, material wealth to um, to experience the heights of of prayer and meditation. Um, yeah, and so in the book they give reasons why you experience this feeling of effortless, this feeling of intrinsic joy, and that you don't need to motivate yourself. And they say it's because these flow states and altered states are what they call a cocktail of 6 of the most pleasurable and most potent neurochemicals our brain can produce. And those are norepinephrine, dopamine, endorphins, anandamide, oxytocin, and serotonin. So because of that, because we're experiencing, they actually say the most pleasurable and potent neurochemicals our brain can produce. They say that because of those neurochemicals, when we get into these flow states and altered states, um, the circumstances or the activity that surrounds these states become highly addictive. These states themselves become highly addictive. And they say that this idea of effortlessness is very interesting because it offers an argument against the Protestant idea of work, which is that you should suffer now for reward later. And flow states and altered states, if you can manage, if you can engineer them in your work, can offer an alternative to that, where your work is intrinsically rewarding. So it's rewarding now and in the long term. Then the next phenomenon that I'll talk about is richness. This feeling of richness that you have when in a flow state or an altered state. So they describe it as how in a normal state you take in a certain amount of information, but when you're in a flow state you take in so much more information, and you begin to see your task and even universal truths in a different way. You gain new perspectives and understand as I said, understand your activity and even sometimes your understanding of the world deepens, and it makes this whole experience very rich. Okay, so now I'm going to explain why they say that happens, and to do that I'm going to give a breakdown of the process, the ordered process of flow as they describe it in the book Stealing Fire. So they say the first thing that happens when you begin an activity and the flow state begins, if it does begin, is that your brain releases dopamine and norepinephrine, which makes you sit up. It increases your focus and allows you to take in more information, and also your pattern recognition goes up. Then the second thing that's happening actually meanwhile is your brain waves go from your habitual waves, which are known as beta waves, and beta waves have large resistance to change in thought patterns, and that's, as I said, those are the waves, the fast moving waves that you have during most of your day, most of your life. And when you get into a flow state, your brain waves become alpha waves, which are slower waves, and they are the same waves you have when you are daydreaming. They have less resistance to change, and um, I would describe that as like sometimes when I'm daydreaming, I catch myself at like the tail of what I was thinking about, and I ask myself, how did I get here? How am I thinking about this? And I think that's how these alpha brain waves can show up, where like your thoughts just flow and flow and flow and flow and flow. And when you're in a flow state or an altered state, your brain waves then can move to theta waves, which have no resistance to change, and are the waves associated with REM sleep. So how they describe it is like these are the type of thoughts where, similar to what you have when you're dreaming, where a T-shirt becomes a tree, becomes a windmill, becomes an octopus, and you don't, and there's no judgment on your side. You don't bat an eyelid. It seems normal and natural that that's how your thoughts should move. And that's what happens in a flow or an altered state. You get those kind of brain waves. And if you're in a very deep flow state, you will get gamma brain waves, which are associated with um, moments of, with eureka moments where two ideas merge and you form a new idea. And those waves only occur when your brain is at the theta wave, when you are experiencing theta brain waves. So then the third thing that happens is that you experience selflessness and timelessness, because you are experiencing transient hypofrontality, because your prefrontal cortex activity in your prefrontal cortex is dimming. And they say this is like taking your lenses, or all your lenses off, and um, so you view the information that you're taking in without your usual biases of how the information relates to you. So how, without your usual bias of identity, and without your bias of how this relates to the past and how it relates to the future. And not only that, but because you are rid of these biases, you're able to make connections that you previously couldn't. Okay, so then the fourth thing that happens is your brain releases endorphins and anandamide, and that is to they say that that's a strategy to keep you in the present, because anandamide and endorphins are pain relievers. So the distraction that would occur if you were to start to get tired or feel physically exhausted is avoided by your brain releasing endorphins and anandamide. So you stay locked in the present. And they say that anandamide also increases lateral thinking, which I will explain a bit more, but is basically the idea that in the process of making of pattern recognition and making connections, you use new information and old information. And when lateral thinking increases, it means that you can go further back into old information to make a connection. Then what happens is, okay, so actually, sorry, I was a little bit wrong. So then after you've got endorphins and anandamide, then your brain waves go from alpha to theta and theta to gamma. And after that, at coming to the end of the flow of the altered state, your brain releases oxytocin and serotonin, which produce feelings of peace and trust and sociability. And I think that this is my thoughts are like this is almost like a strategy of the brain to help you, and they actually say this to help you integrate the information that you've learned. It's almost like how I see it is like you've gone into this experience that was so intense and maybe shifted your perspective so much that afterwards you almost need you almost need some care and some good feeling to help you integrate that new information. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about a few topics that are kind of interlinked. So when I started talking about this idea of richness, I said that that it's the feeling of gaining new perspectives, of deepening your understanding, and what it's really linked to is how in a flow state and in an altered state, your brain vastly improves its processing power. It vastly improves and increases the amount of information it can take in. And what they say, Stephen and Jamie, is that this is because you're tapping into the processing power of your unconscious mind. They say that usually your conscious mind can process 120 bits, and they say that it takes about roughly 60 bits to concentrate when on listening to someone speak. So if you're listening to two people talking, that takes almost all of your almost all of your processing power. But they say that when you get into these altered states, these flow states, because of the neurochemicals that increase the information that you can take in, that improve lateral thinking, that shift your focus into the present moment, and also because of the neural processes that occur, the hypotransient the transient hypofrontality, where that gets rid of your biases and also puts your attention in the present. Because of this, you are able to process so much more information. They use this interesting idea, which is they talk about something called unwelt or unwelt. They say and they say that what that is our unwelt is how much of the information around us we can process. And if you drew a scale, and on the far end you put some conscious creature, maybe like an ant, and then further up you put maybe dogs, and further up you put us. If you look at all these creatures, they can process certain amounts of the information that's around them, and as you go up the scale, the conscious creature can process more of the information. And they say what happens when you get into a flow state or an altered state is that we move up on the unwelt scale. We can process more of the information around us. And that, they say, is the reason why you experience this richness. It's because you are taking in far more information than you would in a regular state. So now I'm also going to touch on a few ideas linked to that idea. So one is what the flow state or an altered state does to your physical performance. So the cocktail of this cocktail of the 6 most potent neurochemicals. They improve your strength, dexterity, your muscle reaction time, and your tolerance for pain. And as we've already said, they also push up your motivation because what you're doing is so intrinsically motivating. Then they say that flow states increase your creativity. So and that adds to that feeling of richness. They describe creativity as the process where you take new information and old information, and you find patterns in that old information that you have and the new information that you've learned, and you put pieces of the old and the new information together to create something completely new and revolutionary. And they add to that something important for the creative process is then to put that revolutionary idea out into the world. And they say that altered states surround the creative process. They say that firstly, you're taking in more information, and what I've already said is that initially, already when you get dopamine and norepinephrine, that you're taking in more information. So those are focusing tools for the brain. So you're taking in more information, and your pattern recognition is better. So is faster. So you're taking in more new information, and you can see patterns with that new information, and your old information faster. Not only that, but your lateral thinking is improved. We said that anandamide improves lateral thinking, so that means you can go further back into your old information to find patterns or ideas that correlate with the new information you're taking in. And then not only that, but because your prefrontal cortex has dimmed activity, you don't have the doubts and fears that you would have, and so you take more risks, and so then you're more likely to put the revolutionary idea that you have out into the public. So in that way, altered states surround the creative process. And Stephen talks about this in his talk at Google. Then another idea which also relates to the feeling of richness that you have, and this is quite an important idea and one that I'll touch on later, is how a flow state or an altered state improves your learning. So they say, Stephen says in his talk, and they say in the book, and Stephen says in his book, The Rise of Superman, how an indicator for whether learning is taking place is how emotionally rich an experience is how many neurochemicals are released during that experience. And he says that flow states and altered states are spikes in neurochemicals, are generally very emotionally rich. So the chances that lesson and information that you are experiencing will be taken from short-term to long-term storage are very high. So I think now is a good time to talk about a question you may have, which is flow sounds great. It sounds like it makes you feel amazing and it has all these benefits, but you might be asking, what's the cost? And Stephen addresses this in his talk at Google when someone actually asks him this question. And he says that because the neurochemicals your brain produces during flow are so potent and so pleasurable, they they are expensive for you to make. They take a lot of minerals and vitamins, and so after you've been through a flow state, you have um, you have an a period of rest, a period of recovery and recuperation. Um, I think of the example of when I go to a music festival, and in recent years when I go to a music festival I've done MDMA with some of my friends, and I think of the feeling I have the next few days when I come home after the music festival. I feel kind of depressed and very tired, and I think that's what he's referring to here is that it is taxing on your body and um, and draining. And I know that I tried stand up comedy a few weeks ago, and after I was after when I got home, I was so tired and I slept so well. Um, and I think this also is also linked to the idea that at the end of flow, your brain releases uh, oxytocin and serotonin, and one of the things that does, they say, is that makes you more sociable. And I think being sociable after a one of these altered states is, for me anyway, has been a really good way to recover and make that recovery easier.